Hello, welcome to week 2, gentlemen. This week's high score and biggest blowout goes to the absolute thumping the Deuce laid upon Chris this week. Tom's got a waddle after that Deuce, put up a thunderous 201.7 points this week, compared to Chris's 2 men in a defense with just 98. For Tom, when you have the joy of running out 3 of the highest 4-scoring players this week, it's mostly going to be a joyride. It's probably a little sweeter that the one guy in the top 4 that you didn't start was actually sitting on your opponent's bench. Leading the charge this week was Stefon Diggs with 47.8 points, Lamar Jackson with 45.6 points, and Jalen Waddle with 43.1. With the 136.5 points that trio put up, you would have beaten every team but 2 this weekend. And then you opted to add Buffalo's defense on top of that with 20.8 points, and even Irv Smith Jr. finally showed up, putting up 14.6 points after last week's dud. If this core stays together and stays intact this year, you are going to be a problem. It's a really nice rebound from last year, in which you came in last.
Different kids, different approach.
On a positive note, Chris, you got 16.5 points from free agent acquisition Devin Duvernay, 15.3 from Allen Robinson II, and 13 points from Najee Harris. On a less positive note, Chris had the most points scored by his bench in a loss this week, with the majority of the 70 points on his bench coming from Tua's 41.9 point outburst. However, even if you had gotten to count both your starting lineup and your bench, you still would have lost to Tom by 30.
Can you just let this go?
In week 2's closest game, Pope 1.0's Serenity Now defeated Derek's Chicken Boners 134.3 to 127.3, a 7-point margin of victory. Pope was led by Mark Andrews, 25.7 points, 18.9 from Matthew Stafford, and 15-point games from CeeDee Lamb, James Robinson, and San Francisco. Really solid performance across the entire team. The 6.1 from Dustin Hopkins was really the weakest player, with all skill players and the defense scoring at least 12 points. This was a lot closer than it needed to be, as you could have gotten Drake London's 24.6 points in off the bench to pick up a couple extra points.
But I'm saving it for later.
Derek, you had 2 25-point games from both Kyler Murray and Mike Williams, followed by 18.5 from Michael Thomas, 15.8 from Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Dalvin Cook let you down this week as he only scored 7.6 points on Monday Night Football, as Minnesota forgot that they have a top 10 running back and only gave him 10 total touches. That sounds very familiar. I'm pretty sure that's the same problem that Green Bay had with Aaron Jones last week.
Forget history and you are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Is Kevin O'Connell smart enough to pound him with the ball next week? That seemed to work out really well for Green Bay. You could have picked up a few tenths of a point by getting Robert Woods in for DK Metcalf, but you had a pretty quiet bench, with DeAndre Hopkins being suspended, Sky Moore picking up only a quarter of a point, and Ken Walker III only scoring 3.5. For the rest of the games, rather than just moving on to elsewhere in the league, I'm going to try to identify something notable about every matchup. Some will be better than others. This week's lowest scoring winner was Alex's Quad D, beating My Car Smells Like the Pits, 107.2 to 82.7. Alex's 107.2 points were the 5th lowest scoring this week, and I'm an idiot as I just went through and looked at all the matchups to figure out who you would have beaten, which I just said you were the lowest scoring team that won a game this week, so I don't know what the fuck I'm thinking.
I'm not a smart man.
Alex was led by the Sun God himself, Amon-Ra St. Brown, putting up 39.4 points to lead the team in scoring. You got 18.4 from Austin Eckler to back that up. After that, you got 5 other players score between 7 and 10 points. I do appreciate that Donovan Peoples-Jones decided to put up a 0 to match the 0 that I got from Paris Campbell. You probably could have gotten the 19.7 points from Tyler Lockett in off of your bench instead of him. Also, I didn't really have a good reason to talk about this Lions meme I saw yesterday, but it really made me laugh, so I wanted to share it. For me, I got 19.1s from T. Higgins and 19 from Derek Carr. When you throw darts, sometimes they hit, and you think it's good. And then you realize maybe you should have just trusted the players you had this whole time. Opting to start Paris Campbell in to replace Michael Pittman, and Jerick McKinnon didn't really work out, as I probably would have been much better off starting Tony Pollard and Elijah Moore. Their 25 points would have been better than what I got. I'm really glad that my number 1 and number 3 wide receiver both made it a whopping week before going down with injuries. To be honest, I figured if anybody was only going to make it a week and go down with injury, it was going to be Saquon.
I shouldn't have said that. I should not have said that.
Lee's unsolicited Dak picks might have had the most points by a player who was acquired this week, but he was still unable to get a win, failing to Jason's You Suck McBain by a final score of 136.9 to 114.5.
You suck, McBain!
Lee picked up Carson Wentz and his 27.8 points to lead his team in scoring, but it still couldn't match Jason's Josh Allen with 29.7. Jason was led by 35 points by the previously mentioned Aaron Jones, Josh Allen, and then 5 other players who scored between 10 and 14 points. You did have Amari Cooper and Devonta Smith on your bench, whose 25.1 and 15 points respectively would have been better options than Jamar Chase and DJ Moore. I could have understood either of those guys over Moore, but probably not over Jamar Chase. For Lee, the Carson Wentz pickup was a great one. Outside of that, you got 15.5 points from Zach Ertz, and between 11 and 12 points from Antonio Gibson, Brandon Ayuk, Ryan Suckup, and Green Bay's defense. You also had a trio of double-digit games from Gerald Everett, Sammy Watkins, and Raheem Mostert. Lots of solid production, but you were really lacking that second big game to compete with the two that Jason had from the A&J boys, Aaron Jones and Josh Allen. The team with the least amount of points scored by their bench this week was Brandon's blown call, knocking off Drew's CMC returns 142.9 to 96. Brandon was led by 32.3 points from Nick Chubb, 25.8 from Christian Kirk, 22.9 from Curtis Samuel, and a pair of 17-point games from Patrick Mahomes and Darren Waller. Jerry Jeudy was hurt in the Denver versus Houston game and only put up 2.2 points as the weak spot on the roster. You could have picked up a few extra points by getting your big scorer off the bench in for him, Marvin Jones, with a whopping 6.3 points. Besides Marv, you got 2.9 from Rex Burkhead, and that was it. Just getting 9.2 points from your bench this week. Watson suspended, Keenan Allen was hurt and didn't play, and then Devontae Parker couldn't catch the 2 targets that were thrown his way, having only caught 1 of the 4 targets that he's been thrown to for 9 yards so far this year. Drew, you were led by Christian McCaffrey's 19.8 points, a pair of 14-point games from Deebo Samuel and Tyler Higbee, and a pair of 10-point games from Hunter Renfrow and Brandon McManus. I'm really surprised that Renfrow had as good of a day as he did, having fumbled twice on the last drive. Fortunately for you, we only lost 1 of them. Weak spots for you this week. Kirk Cousins generally sucks during prime time and did so again this week. And Cordarrelle Patterson sucked because the Falcons were in a negative game script and had to throw the ball a ton in order to try to catch up with the Rams. Now, why they didn't throw him the ball out of the backfield, I don't really know. Best bench player for you this week was Allen Lazard's 9.3 points. Also, I'm really starting to think that Cole Kmet might actually be invisible at this point. Another week, another 1 target, 0 catch game. Also, I have to share this blurb on him from Yahoo because it was absolutely hilarious and savage as hell. This week's matchup featuring a high-scoring defense from the weekend. Aaron's picking so bad it hurts grabbed the upset and knocked off Trent's Joe Burr, oh yeah, Kool-Aid Man, 153.5 to 111.7. I'm going to figure out a good way to say that name at some point. Aaron was led by 33 points from Jalen Hurts, 28.6 from the Tampa Bay defense, and 20.8 from Rashad Bateman. You also had 4 other games from players scoring at least 13 points. The only real weak spots for you were Robert Tonyan, who only had 2 catches, and Chase Claypool, who only had 4. George Pickens still can't get into the starting lineup, but he did bump his 1-catch, 3-yard performance from last week up to 1 catch for 23 yards this week. Well, the real question is, next week, will he bump to 2 catches or 43 yards?
We will watch your career with great interest.
For Trent, you got a huge 45-point game from Tyreek Hill, but the rest of the squad kind of let you down. Joe Burrow put up 16.5 while running for his life, and A.J. Brown and Seattle's defense each put up another 11.9 points. It's a ballsy play going for the double QB start, trying to get Taysom Hill into your flex spot as a tight end. Didn't really work out this week, as he scored just 1.4 points on 14 rushing yards.
It does make a statement, I'll give you that.
Everyone else on your team scored 7.5 or less points. In the matchup this weekend featuring the lowest scoring team, Pope 2.0's Holy Trinity stays hot after last season's championship, putting down Nick's Tebow Hannes 108.6 to 82.5. Pope 2.0 was led by 31.8 from Cooper Kupp, 23.5 from Justin Herbert as he gutted out the rib injury he had on Thursday night, and 19.7 from Cortland Sutton. Hey, speaking of invisible players, there's Darnell Mooney, who just had 1 catch for -4 yards. Man, who had the 2 best pass catchers for the Bears, having a total of 4 catches combined through 2 weeks?
Okay, no more raising hands.
Also, Dalton Schultz had a bad week with just 1.8 points, but it didn't really matter since he got the win. For Nick, I do appreciate you scoring 0.2 of a less of a point than me, so that let me talk about you here instead of my own team. You were led this week by 18.6 points from the only Bears players with a pulse, David Montgomery. 16.4 from Aaron Rodgers and 13.7 from Deontay Johnson. If you want to point fingers, well, Big Al Okwuegbunam.
5 minutes later.
Big Al Okwuegbunam. That's close enough. I'm putting that one in there. That took 4 or 5 takes. Put up a big old 0 spot. And that will be the only time that I'm going to try to pronounce that name. He shall forever be known as Big Al.
At home, they call me Big Al, and I hit dingers.
Also, there's plenty of blame to go around with the rest of your team this week with Juju Smith-Schuster, Nick Folk, and Cleveland's defense, each adding just 4 points. Relatively quiet week on the waiver wire this week, with Garrett Wilson being the big get as 5 players bid on the Jets rookie wide receiver, with Lee's $13 winning bid beating out Pope 1.0, Tom, Chris, and Brandon. Logan Thomas was the only other player that actually fab money was spent on, with Pope 1.0 picking him up for $4. The only new wager this week was that I lost a 6-pack to Alex by losing to him in our matchup, and Green Bay's defense continues to fall further and further behind Buffalo's defense in my wager with Tom, but there's a lot of time left for that one. That's a wrap for this week. Everyone have a great week, and we will see you back here for the Week 3 recap. Editor's note after the fact, I realized I meant to call out during the video that there probably won't be much for stats this season, at least in the first part of it. Nick is occupied 1 day a week on Wednesdays with Green County Leaders, which is a leadership program in our area. Aaron Corder is stuck in it as well. Those boys get to have a blast, I'm sure. But because of that, I'm sure Nick probably won't have a ton of time for stats, at least until maybe late in the season. So if anybody else wants to pick up the mantle and keep track of stats, let me know. I'm sure Nick would be happy to share his spreadsheet with you.